An unusual exhibition was opened at the Balkhankastel State Museum of Arts in July 2021. It presents the work of an outstanding master of painting and graphics whose 80th anniversary was marked this year. Her name is Yelena Beisembinova, who has devoted over 50 years to her work. Regardless of what genre she turned to, be it her favorite still life, landscape or portrait, she glorifies the beauty and perfection of the world in its endless variety. This is what the Museum Stories program is dedicated to today.
И посвящена сегодня программа «Музейные истории».
When artists turn to the genre of self-portrait, they seek to know their place in this world. And surprisingly, the self-portrait has a lot of variations. In particular, already during the Renaissance, the genre of allegorical self-portrait was born, when the artists associate, personify themselves with some phenomenon. It's interesting that a whole series of Yelena Beisembinova's lithographs, which she created at the turn of the 70s and 80s, represents the image of the artist herself when she compares herself with the image of nature at different times of the year.
Так рождается целая серия. Образ осени, весны, лета. Каждый образ.
This is how a whole series is born, the image of autumn, spring, and summer. Each image, in which of course one can see the facial features of the artist, is full of the season that the artist perceives and in which she is immersed. And in this state there is precisely the awareness of her own self. In general, Yelena Beisembinova admires nature, accepts it in all its manifestations, accepts the beauty and unconditional perfection of the world in its diversity. And this is a continuous line through all her works, and this series of self-portraits is no exception.
Автопортретов не исключение.
Undoubtedly, the genre of still life prevails in Beisembinova's works. The most amazing thing is that when we look at the most diverse, amazing corners of her studio, we know that the artist doesn't need to come up with a plot. Reality itself, the world around her, the world of her things, the space of her workshop already suggests the plot, the composition of the picture. More often than not in her compositions we see either a fragment of a table or, as here, shelves on which there are books, ceramics, bookcase, either fresh or dried. All these objects are built into some kind of a special model of the universe, which is very important for the artist to display. It's important to note that Yelena Beisembinova's approach is non-photographic. She rethinks the surrounding reality, creates her own model, reflects that intimate world of things that accompanies her everyday life, her existence. And of course, the beauty and the perfection of the world is a constant refrain which can be read in her works. By the way, it should be noted that butterflies often appear in her compositions. She not only admires the beauty of these fragile creatures. The fact is that before deciding to choose the profession of an artist, Yelena dreamt of becoming a zoologist, and more specifically, an entomologist. She always adored some kind of bugs, insects, butterflies, caterpillars. She has practically carried this hobby, passion through her entire life. And this hobby formed the foundation of her work. Therefore, butterflies are a frequent element or detail of her compositions.
Или деталь ее композиций.
Yelena Beisembinova has been actively working as an artist, as a painter, and as a graphic artist for 50 years. You made friends with her 40 years ago and have been communicating with each other ever since. And of course, I would like to understand what is the fundamental difference of her artistic style from the majority of Kazakhstani masters.
В сущности, в этом смысле она близка всем тем художникам, не только Казахстана, но и других стран.
In fact, in this sense, she is close to all those artists, not only Kazakhstanis, but also from other countries who are attracted by the subject as such. The subject, nature, the elements of nature, such as a landscape or for instance. But still life attracts her most of all because it is static. Once I watched how she painted clouds and how angry she was that the clouds would every minute float away from the place where she began to paint them. They change shape. In this respect, even flowers are less mobile than clouds.
Яблоко или цветок, но при этом пишется и идея цветка. И это дает возможность художнику, который все время в уме держит.
An apple or a flower is being painted, but at the same time the artist is conveying the idea of a flower. And this gives the artist who keeps this idea of a flower in mind all the time an opportunity to avoid naturalism. This is a living flower that has now captivated the artist.
Удивительная вещь, удивительно созданная природой. И
For a person in love with nature, any leaf, any petal, any insect is an amazing thing, surprisingly created by nature. And Yelena is just one of those artists who, of all insects, prefers to paint butterflies. And sometimes, oddly enough, she can insert a paper butterfly into the still life. Maybe in order to emphasize that a flower, even a painted one, is not a real flower, but they are paints that imitate nature. And yet, when a paper butterfly is inserted next to a painted flower, we understand this borderline, similar but not very. It is an abstraction which is at the same time a juxtaposition of one thing with another.
Сопоставление одного с другим. Вообще, это известное такое сравнение. Мы на цветок, сделанный из бумаги.
In general, this is a well-known comparison about a flower made of paper, a piece of fabric or wax. If it is done well, we say as if alive. And about a rose that has just opened its petals, we can say, looks as if made of wax. In other words, this strange movement from the artificial to the living, and in art, this movement from the living to the inanimate.
От живого к неживому. Это попытка преодолеть, неживую краску, превратить ее в живой цветок, в живое лицо.
This is an attempt to overcome the seemingly inanimate paint, to turn it into a real flower, into a real face, into a real apple, real pickled cucumbers. This is a competition between the artist and nature, to be able to portray a lifeless object so that it looks alive. And when they say, why do it? You can instead take a picture with a camera and it can do amazing things. True, but why? Because the artist wants, if I can say so, to defeat the material thing and turn it into a living flower, to the extent that we can even feel its scent.
И превратить его в живой цветок, у которого даже мы можем почувствовать запах.
Very often peonies from her garden become the objects of her still lives. And you named about 20 species of peonies, an amazing variety. How does she vary the same flowers, the same dishes? How does she manage to avoid monotony?
Что здесь? Во-первых, тут то розовое, то больше белое, то там где-нибудь белизна.
What's here? Firstly, here it is more pinkish, then more white. There is whiteness in which blue colors come out. This is an endless variety of forms. In addition, one flower has bloomed more, while another one bloomed less than the others. She sometimes goes out, sits in front of the flower bed and paints quickly. But this one is a separate flower. It takes a whole day to paint one flower. It takes time. But these ones were painted in the studio. One can still see some movement here. She needs this movement from the bottom up. Here she puts some small flowers just next to a gorgeous flower of an awesome shape.
Как бы вот простенькое рядом с шикарным цветком, да, потрясающей формы.
This is also a compositional movement. And here a smooth tablecloth would have been boring. It is set in motion, as if it has been just thrown and folds appeared all over this tablecloth. Well, let it be, it's alive. Just like here, where there are even more folds, because there is a higher composition here. There are many wild flowers here, and they are put in a situation as if they were specially grown roses or peonies. To some extent, it doesn't matter if it's a specially grown flower or a roadside flower, because there is a striking shape in every flower. As Socrates put it, since it is expedient, then it is wonderful.
Как бы сказал Сократ, раз целесообразно, то и прекрасно.
A separate large section of the exposition presents landscapes where green is a predominant color, such a dense array of green, and all of these shades are also impressions from nature that Yelena Beisembinova perceives.
Елена Сергеевна всегда стремилась, как бы вот.
Yelena has always tried to escape from the city, although the city is, of course, civilization. This is what art gives us. Because in the countryside, as in Ukraine, you can paint stoves, walls, windows, but it is the city that presented painting to mankind.
Человечеству живопись. Когда ты пишешь в мастерской или сидишь перед одним пионом или одной розой.
When you are painting in a workshop or sitting in front of a peony or a rose, then there is you and one object in front of you. When you are sitting in a garden, there is a garden around you, not a twig, not a flower, not a tree, but a garden. How do we look at the garden? We are not singling out a flower, a leaf, etc. We see green all around us. Therefore, even her brush became different. Contours disappeared and color arrays appeared. But even green has a lot of shades.
Вот. Появились массивы цвета, но даже в зеленом очень много оттенков. Поэтому, когда Елена Сергеевна пишет вот этот, то, что ее окружает.
This is why, therefore, when Yelena paints what surrounds her, we see how many shades of green there are. Somewhere the grass in itself is green, and somewhere a shadow fell from a tree that we don't see here. Then, through this greenery, little mellows make their way. Very often she likes to put herself in it, but she cannot portray herself. Here is a chair. Someone has been here, sat there for a while and left. The presence of a person is always felt in any artist's work.
Это точка наблюдения, хотя на самом деле она написала это с этой точки зрения, но это то, что можно сесть под деревом.
This is a vantage point. Although she actually painted from this point, one can sit under a tree in the shade and be dissolved in greenery, in the green, which comes and gives a feeling of silence and peace. Pacification. Yes, tender joy that you can be yourself.
Впервые натюрморт как жанр возникает в искусстве голландцев 17 столетия. Не случайно они...
For the first time, still life as a genre appeared in the art of the Dutch in the 17th century. It is no coincidence that they named this genre or this theme in art quiet life. Already in those days, it was indeed putting emphasis on the objects that surround us in our everyday life. The desire to see their aesthetics, their beauty, some kind of unpretentious appeal, moved artists to create absolutely incredible works. Today, 3 centuries later, Yelena Beisembinova, continuing this theme, is able to find her own individual interpretation in it. For example, one of her earliest works, created in the mid-80s, was called Glass. Placing in the composition various objects that have a glossy, transparent, reflective surface, the artist observes the shape of these objects, the play of their reflections in the glass, the amazing behavior of things in the light environment. It is no accident that in such a seemingly chamber-still life, an interior space in which the artist resides appears, because the reflection in one of the metal surfaces of the window of the room in which the artist is located is also an attempt to reflect the world in which she lives, which she reinterprets and which she admires. A separate field for the artist's experiments is beadwork. The creation of artworks by her is a whole huge topic that delights with its diversity, complexity, ornamentation, and of course it is a subject for the manifestation of creative imagination. This picture is a vivid example of how she captures those handmade pieces created by her, in which she finds a separate, inexhaustible source of creative inspiration.
Наступает момент, когда в живописи Елены Beisembиновой начинает главенствовать небо.
The moment comes when the sky, illuminated by the sun, with changeable, moving clouds, begins to dominate in the artwork of Yelena Beisembinova. It fills the composition. Moreover, the artist builds her landscapes in such a way that the larger part of the composition of the picture is filled with this incredible element, absorbing with its immensity, its bottomlessness, its bewitching beauty and changeability, which the artist seeks to portray. Today we began our conversation with the fact that Yelena Beisembinova often turns to the genre of self-portrait. It is interesting that her present-day self-portraits are becoming completely different, very complex, strange, metaphorical. The artist can imagine her self-portrait in the form of a kind of a shadow on the wall. The work is called Morning Shadow, an indirect perception of herself, the complexity and mesmerizing change of the world, which is very important for the artist to capture, grasp, convey and represent on the canvas. Or another amazing composition, which can also be perceived as a self-portrait allegory. And my head flew off. This is what the title of the composition is. A bottomless, endless heavenly space against which a light straw hat flies with fluttering ribbons caught by gusts of wind. This is Yelena's head, and in this image, the image of the artist herself is perceived and transmitted. The artist who endlessly loves this world, this life, creativity. Of course, thanks to these paintings, we can feel that Yelena Beisembinova is a happy person and a happy artist.
И, конечно же, благодаря этим картинам мы можем почувствовать, что Елена Beisembinova – счастливый человек и счастливый художник.
plunge into the magic and fascinating Yelena Beisembinova's painting world in the Museum Stories program. Stay tuned to the next episodes on Qazaq TV and subscribe to our YouTube channel and other social media.